Hey guys, it's your Badger Dad Mike back with a review of Amazon's Wheel of Time Season 1. I just finished watching this. This is a frustrating failure on television. I'm a huge fan of Robert Jordan's books. I'm a huge fan of The Wheel of Time. Not a super fan. I read the books at least a few times, across the entire series a few times over the years, and enough that I'm willing to give them a lot of room. The entire season, I didn't want to make an episode-to-episode review because I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to see where they took it. I wanted to see where their vision was going, particularly because Rafe Judkins, who's the showrunner, has said multiple things. And some of them sounded very good, and some of them not so good. But I was willing to give them benefit of the doubt. And now that it's over, I think the title of my video sums it up. It's a frustrating failure because the potential of the show is tremendous. There is so much that the show brings. One, it has a huge budget. It can actually showcase fantasy. Unlike Game of Thrones, which had a lot more of a hill to climb to justify television, Wheel of Time had 8 episodes. 8 episodes. Yeah, it would be nice if they had more, but I honestly don't think it would have done significantly better given the choices they made in the show. I think having more material, more episodes to work with would not have saved the fact that this was fundamentally a writing direction choice that led to the show being so frustrating and, at the end of the day, I think a failure. I'll explain why. The fact that you have so much to work with and you throw it away. On the one hand, there's 3 or 4 criticisms of how the show was presented and how the show was done that I think will get to the heart of the matter. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room, and that is Rafe Judkins and his approach and the way he approached it with his writing team. Because I think they are at the heart of the problem with this show. Rafe has publicly said, in the lead up to the show at least, his goal is to tell the story of the books, Robert Jordan's story. With the understanding that you have to adapt certain things, sure, understandable, but he wants to tell the story. And yet this season showed, as a whole, that he does not have any intention of telling Robert Jordan's story in terms of how he set up the character arcs, how he ran the character arcs through, how he's been defending the choices that were made. And you can't say things like, oh, well, COVID was the reason why it didn't look as good as it could have. And maybe the show's special effects weren't quite up to par, or maybe they couldn't get characters to film, or Barney Harris left, or these are all excuses, and they're poor excuses at that, because the fundamental problem of the show comes down to 3 parts. 1, character assassination, or you can spin it, poor character setup and character development. And I use that not lightly because these characters feel, at the point the season ends, this feels like they've assassinated the core characters. And the funny thing is that everything I've seen where you have characters, Rand and Perrin and Matt and Lan, that a lot of the male characters were not just depowered, but a lot of the agency removed, a lot of the big flashy moments that they could have had removed. A lot of that was done, probably intentional, because of how they set up from the very first scene of the show that this was going to be a men versus women dynamic.
The world is broken. Many, many years ago, men who were born with great power believed they could cage darkness itself. The arrogance. When they failed, the seas boiled, mountains were swallowed up, cities burned, and the women of the Aes Sedai were left to pick up the pieces.
Which it doesn't make any sense to me, again, because Robert Jordan, I think, is one of the premier storytellers where he shows a more traditional point of view on men and women, and yet the goal is unification, and the goal is balance, and the goal is connection. And that's the way the whole story is developed. And yet that is completely overlooked in favor of imbalancing things and pitting men versus women. It's not even a question of gender on a spectrum, so to speak, because most of the characters presented are men and women, and is presented as men and women antagonistic and attacking one another. That was a choice that was made, and that undermines the entire drive of Robert Jordan's story. And I think it's a huge failure coming into 2021 because it leads to setting up characters where characters don't have agency, and it leads to characters making choices that don't make sense, or not making choices that they should have done to make sense, and it ends up hurting all the characters. Because whereas Rand and Perrin and Matt and even Lan are neutered in their roles and their choices that they make for the most part throughout the season, anytime they could do something, they only do it if they're allowed to or guided to or directed to by a female character, or they don't even do it and the female character just does it. Even the moments in the books that could have been not allowed. The most egregious example of this in the entire season, I thought, was in the last episode where Lan and Nynaeve are talking before Lan goes off to find Moiraine. And not only does Nynaeve say, I know Moiraine better than you do, even though you've been in her head functionally for 20 plus years. But let me show you Master Tracker, Master Swordsman, last line of a people who have fought the Dark One face to face. I'm going to show you how to do it. You can't do it yourself. And not only that, not only can you not do it yourself, but you can't do anything because you're not even, this would have been your moment to say, I'm going to go find her because I need to save her. I need to find her. I need to protect her. Nope, not allowed to make that choice, that decision. He could not do anything himself if she didn't tell him. That is a ripping out the character and removing any agency. And it damages the other characters, like Nynaeve and Egwene, both worse off by being given more Super Saiyan amazing moments, because by making them significantly more impactful than they should be at this point in the show, you damage their characters for the longer term. Because what stakes do they have? What growth can they have when they can do incredible things with no training and no understanding of their powers, no understanding of anything? It ends up destroying all the characters. One is by these decisions they've made to remove agency and to try to mix and match and displace the different characters from their roles and their arcs, they end up destroying everyone. We end the season where it felt like every single character is worse off than when they started in terms of their ability to grow or be interesting as characters. Number 2 is the pacing of the show as a whole. I think this was a balance between world building and character development and plot, which again is a writing problem. That no one sat down in the writer's room and said, hey, we have 8 episodes, not 10 or 12. We don't have 2-hour episodes. We have 8 episodes that are an hour long. How do we possibly convey the world around using a visual medium and focus our writing much more tightly? And they did not do that at all, because certain episodes felt very one-dimensional, focused on one character, such as in, I believe it's episode 6, with Moiraine. It's all about Moiraine, who is the least important for us to grow and connect to of all the characters, because she's the Obi-Wan style character of the series. You don't need to know a lot about her to get what she's coming from. You do need to get into the heads of the characters who are going to develop the most and should be the most relatable and connectable, which is the 5 coming out of Emond's Field. And yet, that's not how it goes. We spend a whole episode with Moiraine. Episode 5, we spend a whole episode with a warder we don't know who ends up dead at the end of it. So even if we understand him better than most and his arc, we could see where it's going. All it does is spend a whole episode of television on a character who doesn't matter to the story. Again, sacrificing the main characters and sacrificing their moments. And it ends up where from a pacing point of view, this makes it feel very erratic. It feels like they had a goal in the first 3 episodes, and that's why they kind of got better and better and they worked together a little more. And then by episode 4, you get to a point and then it falls off a cliff in terms of inconsistency. I don't know if this is just change of directors. I don't know if this was the change of writing, maybe who was writing or how they were writing it, but pacing was a big problem. And I kept watching because I wanted to see Wheel of Time and I was willing to give them benefit of the doubt. But for a casual watcher who supposedly Rafe Judkins says he's courting the non-book readers to try to build the show's presence, this is not how you go about doing it. By making a show that the pacing is so inconsistent, and by making it hard to relate and connect to characters, except on a very shallow level. And the third, I think, which is the biggest issue, and both the other 2 points tie into it, is the choice of spectacle over substance. And for a show that had such a big budget, you would think the spectacle would be more incredible, but instead, you spend your time scratching your head during some of the most supposedly important moments. Rand fighting the Dark One, the charge of the Tarwin's Gap to fight an army of Trollocs. You would think that these moments would have meaning and more importance, but because they've done so little to earn the substance of those moments, they feel like they're shoehorned in for spectacle. And because the characters themselves, the stakes have been set all over the place in terms of what characters can do, what matters to the characters, where they're going, why they're even doing it, what are they doing? It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't feel like the characters have a motive for what they're doing. Perrin was the worst in this case, because by the last episode, he felt like he was doing nothing. He had nothing there. Even the supposed question of the Way of the Leaf, he didn't make a decision. He just sat around. He didn't make a decision. So it felt like his arc didn't go anywhere either. The spectacle was there, but the character moments that should have landed didn't land. And it's because they chose the flash and pomp over meaning. When the 5 female channelers, they're not Aes Sedai, so 5 channelers, go out to fight the army of Trollocs, you just remove all stakes of the story by making the magic mean nothing. If these non-Aes Sedai can do this, why would you want to become Aes Sedai? It doesn't make any sense. And why should there be any concern or stakes of what the Dark One's doing if an entire army can be obliterated by 5 women who have no idea how to channel? The tower should be perfect. Hundreds of women who can channel who are Aes Sedai. So the Dark One's got nothing going, right? See the problem? spectacle was there, but there's no substance behind it. And that destroys all sense of meaning for the show and destroys all stakes going forward. The fact that the last part of the final episode was supposed to be setting up a new threat. Well, what kind of threat? Oh, here's an enemy that's actually the threat. So we're going to downplay the actual threat of the story. And remind me, Rafe Judkins, you were the one saying the goal is to tell the story of the books, and yet you're going to set up a human threat that's supposed to be more cataclysmic and terrifying than the Dark One and his armies and the creatures that you've been trying to set up stakes for the last 7-8 episodes. And what these choices end up doing is it creates a flashy moment for television. It will ruin the long-term decisions that go into the show. The last example I'll use is from the beginning of episode 8, and that is where they show the past world. Perfect example. They have a scene with Lews Therin, who they've barely mentioned throughout the show, and they haven't even given a sense of the prophecies or why they met, where they're coming from, or who he is. They've given nothing. They just show him, which you'd think is a tip of the hat to the book fans. And then they show a perfect world of paradise, and it makes him look like an utter moron. It makes him look like there's no reason for him to get involved with the Dark One. Everything's fine. Spectacle. It looks cool. It looks like a science fiction world, and it's cool that that's the past, so we're in a dystopian future. That's kind of cool. But the scene had no substance to it. It meant nothing. To someone who was watching the show without the books, it means nothing. To someone who read the books, it doesn't make any sense. It's unearned. The meat's not there. It's ridiculous. And that's what sums it up. It's a frustrating failure because it had so much potential, and the failure that will be, if it continues on the path of the season, it will fail because this is not just a poor adaptation. It's poorly written television. And for someone who just started The Expanse, season 1, head and shoulder difference. And it's primarily due not to the special effects, not to the money spent, not even to the acting. It's the writing and story decisions. Since this season was a Potemkin village where it looks like a caricature and the substance is not there, I can only imagine where they're going to go from here. And it's going to probably be bad. So let me know what you guys think down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, Mike Badger signing out.